Dave, thanks very much for joining me today on Culture Corner, especially for nipping in pre-op. Yeah. Hope all that goes well for you on Saturday. But so thanks very much for joining me. Appreciate you taking the time to come across. Obviously, we've met a couple of times, so I know who you are. But for anybody who's listening or watching that doesn't know, if you could give a bit of an overview about yourself and your career, that'd be great, and the teams you manage, etc.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm VP of Engineering at Kalibrate. Kalibrate's a software house that makes decision support software, primarily for the fuel retail industry, but across a bit broader retail as well. And yeah, I've come sort of through a fairly traditional progression up from being an engineer. The first role in was actually in IT support, but sort of made as much as I could a development shape out of it, and then sort of just progressed through development roles, senior developer. Took on a team while I was senior developer and got promoted up in that team, and then sort of just accelerated from there. So I've taken a lot of chances when they've come, but yeah, just sort of progressed, and so now have a team of just under 30. Wow. And we work with an external partner as well, so we've got sort of expandable team really. Brilliant. With them involved.
Is your team, is it obviously Kalibrate global, is your team global, is it UK?
So my team's all UK based. We've actually got one in Canada at the moment, but that's just because she's gone on her partner got asked to go to Canada by his company, and we've got an office in Canada, so we just said, yeah, it's fine, you can sort of stay with us. So she's working, what to me are unconscionable hours, but because I think she's on 11 o'clock our time, and she's on the west coast, or she's in Calgary, so I think she's on 8-hour time difference or something.
Yeah.
So I think she's working at about 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, they're crazy.
But we're not making her do it.
Just get that across.
She's choosing to, yeah.
Perfect. Flexible company, obviously.
Yeah.
The Kalibrate saying, yeah, absolutely no problem.
Yeah, well, and part of it's that we've got that global footprint. So we have 24/7 coverage from support perspective already, and so we've got, the only thing we've not really got fully distributed is engineering. So we've got UK focus, and then we've got we've made a few acquisitions over the last 4 years, and they're all North America. So there's one in Canada and 3 in the US, but they're fairly scattered around the US. So Texas and Rhode Island and Ann Arbor, and there's one other, and they've gone to hiring fully remote largely across the US. So we've got pretty big spread within North America, and then we've got the UK. So especially with working with support teams or working with our CS people, they can be anywhere around the world. So it's to our benefit if we've got people going beyond at either end of the day, really. We still, on paper, have core hours, but there's nothing set in stone with them, really.
That's really good, because I suppose it's not alien to the business, is it? Yeah. It's not a mental shift going, right, okay, we've never experienced this before, how do we manage it? It's almost already there.
Yeah, it's been interesting seeing the difference through different bits of the business. So our finance team are still very based in Manchester, and they're maybe in 2 days a week, and no one else is in more than a day a week.
Okay.
Or they might be 3, but they're sort of the most consistently local and the most sort of attended in the office.
Yeah.
And I guess they're sort of just the department that are the most wedded to that old thing. So a couple of them are just because they're choosing to.
Yeah.
But we do have a bit of that. There's sort of baseline attendance of people who it's better for them to be in the office than at home. But finance seemed to be the only, and it was HR and it was marketing and first and second line support had all those 3 sort of had it from the business that there was a bit more of an expectation, and that seems to have tapering away.
Yeah.
What they say is sort of counter, and they're focused on bringing people back in, but actually they went quite hard on the expectations of getting people back in. And that seems to have sort of faded off, and they seem to have a much more natural balance now.
Right.
But yeah, finance seem to be the last clingers on being office based.
It's quite a traditional function, isn't it, as well?
Yeah,
where
exactly.
you could, the engineering aspect and that, and other areas, maybe the project offices and that sort of thing, has got, I want to say a bit more flexible mindset, but that's probably unfair, isn't it? But you used to talk of finance, I think it's very traditional.
Well, and sort of the counter of what I was saying about the flexibility in terms of us and the time zones is like finance aren't working with customers, and they're not dealing with those disparate people around the world. We have sort of payroll in the US time zones, but other than that, they are sort of their own function, and they can just work core hours. So it might, in part, I'm sure it's better alignment with the nature of that team, but in part they're more able to do it than the rest of us as well.
Yeah, that's true. And I was going to ask you about recruitment in a little bit, and I wanted to ask you about how did you get into tech, and was it a natural, or why did you get into it? Was it natural? I always wanted to do it, or?
So it was my natural fallback. And nothing else came up.
Okay.
So yeah, I was mum worked in tech, used to program with punch cards and stuff, and then became sort of more IT management-y stuff. Dad was always a teacher, so sort of grew up with lots of computers being brought home from school. Like, we were like a decade behind what was meant to be in schools now, but always had computers around and stuff. And so was always completely familiar with them. Tried to get into programming like off my own back and just couldn't make it work. At A level, chose not to do computing.
Right. Okay.
Did music tech instead. And I think I had a lot more fun doing that.
Yeah.
But then it was sort of the default that I was going to do at uni. So I did computer science at UMIST, and that was sort of, if I'd not thought of anything else, that's what I was going to do, and it was what I did. And then out of that, sort of going into engineering was sort of the same. It was anything else might have taken my fancy and pulled me in a different direction, but sort of that was I'd sort of set my stall out that's the way I was going to go, and that's just what carried through. And like I say, I did start off in a IT support role, and that was really because I couldn't get on any grad schemes, and so I did umpteen phone interviews, all name a time when you've done X or when you've demonstrated Y, and it was 2021 coming out of uni. There's no times that I've done those things. Like I'd worked the doors for 3 years at that point. I kept giving examples from that because that's actually quite rich experience compared to a lot of other people going in at that point, but really didn't get on with that interview format and didn't get past a single one of those. Thought I'd never get past a phone interview. Fortunately, a couple of them worked out down the line. But yeah, so I'd had a summer placement at this company. So it was a quite big estate agent. And they had 18 branches or something. So I had quite a bit of stuff in-house. And I'd done a summer placement for them through a program that Shell run, which is about just getting enterprise exposure for people. And so did 6 weeks with them, which they extended to the rest of the summer till I went back. And then they just asked if I wanted to come back. So I had that, not quite as a fallback, but it was there as an option. So ended up doing that. Was there 18 months, I think, after that. So I've sort of done 2 years there total. And then an opportunity came up for a dev role at Manchester University.
right, okay,
and sort of latched onto that and went straight for it.
And away you went from there. Yeah. It sounds like the barriers to it, it's very traditional back then, wasn't it? Because I think like probably 20 years I've been in tech recruitment now, and I think about right at the beginning when he was saying for software engineering roles we need a first or a 2-1 from a red brick uni, and you've got to fit into this little box, and actually there's no flexibility on it like that. And times are changing and moving away from it, but it sounds like your experience was very much akin to that, and it's hard to break into it.
Yeah, and I think sort of, I'm sure it carried on for a bit, but I've had conversations about this recently, and I think I probably was sort of part of that last generation where, for maybe not for entry level, but definitely for those first couple of roles where it was expectation of a degree they might have or equivalent, but always unclear what or equivalent was. And so sort of came out with a third, so not the best outcome. Was the best drinking, but sort of balanced out. But sort of that didn't really seem to hamper me. I'm sure it may have done in some sort of checkbox exercises, but I definitely felt that requirement being there for having a degree, whereas now it's not that it's a disadvantage, although obviously it's now a much greater financial investment, and you've got to have a much better rationale behind wanting to do a degree. I think there's still value to them, but I definitely don't think they're a must-have anymore.
No. Well, I had this question for later on, and seeing as we've landed on it, I remember, so when we met a couple of weeks ago, we were chatting, weren't we, about, you'd had a discussion with somebody about, do you need a degree to get into tech nowadays? And I thought, do you know what, that'll be a great poll for LinkedIn. So I posted it out on LinkedIn. 70% of the respondents said that you don't need a degree to get into tech. So I had yes, no, and then depending on the role. I think maybe like 15% might have said, or maybe 20% said depending on the role. So I think there's probably still some, if you, I don't know, whether you're a software engineer in a farm or a biofarm sector where you need the life science experience, I get that and understand. But I think that the world is shifting significantly now, isn't it? There's a lot of degree apprenticeships, there's a lot of alternative routes into tech, and do you think that's the way forward? Yeah,
I can see there's areas where there's a higher bar, and it's not to do with engineering capability, but it's to do with those additional bits. So if you're doing complex maths, then I still think you'd probably be losing out on people if you make that a hard thing, but it can be it gives you a blanket, we know these people have met this bar if you require a maths degree or a computer science degree. But then I think my eyes were really open to it with my degree. So I did computer science at UMIST. My best mate did software engineering at UMIST. And across 3 years, we did 2 units difference. And mine required a minimum of a C in maths and his didn't. And his didn't have the statistics module that mine did. And there was one other one that was different. But on paper, like software engineering and computer science, you don't particularly think they're different. I've got a BSc, he's got a BEng, but like, if anything, you'd probably think the BEng was sort of more lean towards that side. But he could have got a first in that without really gaining any math stuff, but it would tick that box for him if he was applying for those jobs. So I do think it can be a shortcut to you've done these things, but I think the bigger benefit is just you've demonstrated a commitment to learning stuff. But again, sort of there was a bit of a gulf on my course between the people who were doing it because they were interested, and even though I was fairly passively in that camp, but I'd consider myself on that side. So I chose to be there. No one had pushed me into it. And there was a bit of a camp of people who'd been told that it was a way to earn the big bucks. And
definitely.
like I have a slight concern in some of the boot camp shapes that they sort of pull in some of that as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's better to have an open door, and I don't think people with the wrong motivators survive very well.
No.
So I think it's better to have as many people, and then it naturally filters out to the people who really bring in what they want to bring.
Yeah. The other people still fall by the wayside, won't they? Yeah. And I think just by having more routes into the tech career has got to be good. I think especially with university courses now, it's getting more and more expensive, isn't it, for people to go to uni? They're coming out with significant debt, where now you can actually go and earn, learn, and develop within a business on the academies or the graduate programs and apprenticeships and that kind of thing. I think it's a lot better really for the industry.
Yeah, I think there's real value to the apprenticeships, and I think it's gone a bit out of kilter. I think the real surge of them was maybe a bit less than 10 years ago, maybe about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And there were quite a few of these places that were big facilitators of apprenticeships, and they'd be putting people into reasonably small places.
Yeah. But
then I think there were 3 or 4 of them that went bump. So Bright Futures was the one in Manchester. But I think that model was really good because, like you say, they're working while they're learning. I think at the moment there's quite a lot of positive going on around there with the big orgs. So I've been doing some bits with Ada in Manchester. And theirs have all been almost all been from bigger organisations. So from your bookings, from Money Supermarket, Auto Trader. And I think I've been trying to make moves. I've yet to. HR are on board, finance less so, in trying to get some in at ours, because I think we just about hit the right balance where we could give appropriate to support. Because I think maybe that's something that's come and gone, is that people see apprentices or just juniors, sort of genuine entry level roles, as cheap resource. And
is that concerning?
It's not. It's not if you're doing it right, because you need to be investing in building them as people, building their abilities, and fundamentally they're going to end up a lot more expensive than when you bought them in. But you get a bit back because you've invested in them, so you get them at that higher potential, probably still at a cheaper rate. But they aren't just, you can't just look at the numbers. You need to make sure that you do have those support structures in place to give them the proper development that they need. Yeah, definitely. Otherwise it's wasted cost and wasted time, isn't it? Like you said, it becomes viewed on as cheap labour again, doesn't it? And would you, at Kalibrate, would you run your own sort of mini academy or grad scheme, or would you bring people? Is that what Booking are doing, or are they bringing them in from like a boot camp or a coding? So I think they're doing both. I think I'd equally consider sort of any of those options. So we did a bit of a trial run over the summer, just a summer placement for like school leaver pre-A level, and we wanted to test our own limits really and see whether we could give sufficient support even at that level. Sort of, he was self-driven and had been doing a bit of stuff in his time, and when we'd agreed it was going to happen, we'd given him some reading to do in advance. But we were able to both give him something out of it and for him to bring some value to us. So we weren't expecting loads, but we wanted it to be as little of a dip as possible in supporting him. And we've sort of proven that out. So I think we could now extend that. And I made quite a big ask in the budget and it got pushed back. but really I'd rather not get drips and drabs of people through. I'd quite like to get a cohort of people, and I was looking across product engineering, testing, data, and I'd like to get across all of that so that you've got a cohort who are, even if they're not working on the same stuff, they came in together, they're sort of the class of that year. Like, I think that you build I know a lot of the boot camps do it, like, or all of them set them up with a WhatsApp group with everyone that they were on the boot camp with and stuff. But I think even if you're internal, it's good to have that same sort of group mentality where they've got an internal support network as well as the support you're giving them as well.
Exactly. Other people are going through the journey. Like you said, one might be a tester, one might be data engineer, but they're there together, they started together, they're going through that journey together. Like you said, they've got the support network, someone to lean on. I think that helps, and it'll probably ensure that they stick with it even in the tough times. And own little sort of, not shoulder to cry, but the mentorship, and sort of support unit, isn't it really?
Yeah, definitely. I think, sort of it can be a daunting thing coming in, especially if you're a junior coming into a established organisation. Sort of the jump, and again, sort of not to completely downplay the value of degrees, but the jump for me in what I'd learned on my degree, which made me quite competent, and what the expectation was in the real world, even when that real world wasn't in a real software house sort of context, where it was just sort of doing stuff off my own bat and it was enabling stuff. But even in that world, the bar of what was actually required and just the recognition that other people are going to use what you've built, and that you now have to cater for more than just the absolute perfect case because you're the only person using it. You know that you're going to always have to do that. Sort of was a real. It seems so obvious, but like that just isn't asked of people really at uni. Maybe I'd have got a higher mark if I realised that, but yeah, I think, and pair that with just your first proper job or your first office job, like less of them obviously now in the office, but even there, I think sort of that could be even more daunting if you're a junior in a largely remote or fully remote organisation. Like, I know hopefully anyone management-wise who's doing that is going to be putting a lot of support systems in place, but being in an office and having your first thing that you're working on feels isolating and like a big enough challenge. If you're doing that in a room on your own, I can see that being even sort of the next level up. Yeah,
it'd be overwhelming, wouldn't it? I was gonna also ask you, I'll ask you a bit about sort of team collaboration and that sort of thing later on. I was gonna say, if you were bringing somebody into Kalibrate into your team, so I said a couple of individuals, I spoke to a few people who said, when you're younger, when you're learning, because there's always this in the office, out the office, hybrid, how many days a week type of thing that everybody's toing and froing over. Would you have a greater in-office presence just so that they can have, it's just those little things that you pick up by being sat next to each other that you don't get if you were sat home, the ongoing support?
I put a lot of thought into it when I was sort of putting in for the budget for what we're looking for, because I put in for 10 people. It's obviously a chunk of people in a team of 30. So, but yeah, sort of my thought around it was probably that it would go with at least minimum 2, if not 3 days for them. And at the moment, I've got all my team come in, well, not even all the team come in 1 day a week, but those that do come in 1 day a week on the same day. And that maybe I'd break that up and get people doing, maybe get some people doing a couple of days, but so that there was always not just the junior people in, but there was always someone around, even if they're off working on their own stuff, but they've got someone that they can in person pester really. But not to do that 5 days a week, because that's no longer realistic, I don't think, for like the working environment. So it's finding that balance. I do think they're the people at the most risk of disadvantage by not being in the office.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you there. It's almost like you disadvantage them. You tie one hand behind the back and say, crack on. Yeah. They need that learning and support there, don't they, for them to evolve and develop and collaborate and poke you and prod you and get that information.
And a lot of it's passive. Like I broadly think that people should do what works best for them.
Yeah.
I think, like I say, when my team are in, I try and have them all in on the same day, because like for me, the biggest benefit is just them being in the same room, even if we're just going out for lunch. Like it doesn't need to be focused on work. It's just that we're getting that passive collaboration with them.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of that bit of like just being there when other stuff's happening or when there's an ad hoc conversation, like you can recreate it just online, but it's so much harder to do, and particularly so much harder to just pull someone in who's just going to sit on the sideline and listen.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're sat next to you at your desk, like, unless you're discussing anything sensitive, then no one thinks twice about them sort of stopping what they're doing, just turning, paying attention to what's going on.
Exactly.
And like, I think sort of things like pairing and stuff, I think can work absolutely fine remotely, where you're basically recreating as much of that as possible, aren't you? You've got a open channel. Sort of pre-COVID, we at Open Money we were doing 2 days at home,
right?
But because we were sort of early days startup, sort of there's lots of chaos going on. Quite often we'd just leave a channel open for the whole day, and me, my head of mobile, and any of the others of the team, some of it drop in and drop out, but just sit on a call basically all day. And so just trying to recreate that, but still working on our own things, but rather than dropping a message, just speak up if you want to say something. And it worked for what it was. I'm not saying that's sort of the ultimate way to be, because people work better with headphones on or whatever, listening to the music. But I think, that's one. I think people developed in their careers aren't at a huge disadvantage of that. I think it comes much more into the balance of pros and cons. Broadly, they balance in however you want them to balance as an individual. But I do think that's probably the bit that the juniors are missing out on the most. Is just one, their mentoring stuff may well be better in person, but just not being present for some of those things. Like I say, that those bits where you're working on your stuff and it's the first things you've worked on, even if you're pairing with someone else, like if that's all you're seeing, again, I think you're at a disadvantage from if you're doing that but you're in the room while there's planning for the next thing going on, or someone else is working on something. You can just be asking what they're doing, and sort of I'm sure good buddy systems, all of those bits will fill some of those gaps, but that feels the most difficult bit to recreate in a virtual setting.
Like you said, even if they're not earwigging, but even if there's something going on over there and they're sort of working away, but they're listening to the conversation, you've always got a chance to learn, haven't you, and develop, which is great. I think, like you said, for the more junior people, if you're bringing those cohorts in, then more days in the office, because it can be faded out over time, can't it? And you can work around it, but just giving them the best opportunity. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, hiring, you're massive advocate, neurodivergent hiring processes, and also supporting that in the working environment. After our conversation the other week, I was thinking about it. I watched a video at the weekend. I actually posted it on LinkedIn this morning, and it was from Autism Plus. Brilliant, 50 minutes, and it was talking about the recruitment process and how you can make it more accessible. So it's really, have you an inclusive hiring process? So what sort of things have you done to help or adaptations in the interview process or at work? Because I think it's a big topic that not a lot of people, or not enough people, talk about.
So I think one of the key principles, and it sort of applies to both interview and onboarding process and in the workplace as well, is just visibility and sort of transparency of expectation. So at the most simple, sort of whether it's your interview and that you're really clear about what the format of that interview is going to be and what it's going to contain. If you've got questions, I think it varies depending on the type of questions you're going to ask, but if you can, and it's sensible to, like, share the questions so that people can have prepared them in advance, especially if you were doing those scenario questions like name a time when.
Yeah.
Like give them those questions in advance, because you're not testing someone's ability to recall those things on the fly. You either want to actually know the information, in which case give them every benefit you can, or you're testing their memory of their own capabilities and their, like, but even if you just want to test how they put it into words, you're still better giving them the chance to prepare for that. And sort of in the workplace, the equivalent being never put a meeting in with no agenda.
Yeah.
Like I can't stand them. Like, I have enough of them that I have to put up with them now. But especially if they're coming from like direct line manager or something, like, can be a really intimidating thing to have, especially a short notice meeting put in with no agenda. And you're like, oh, what's this about? And can obviously be about the most mundane thing, or it can be something really positive. But if you put someone on the back foot by not doing that, then you're sort of starting in a negative place. And a lot of the big conversation about neurodivergent accessibility stuff at the moment is that it's sort of the raising tide lifts all boats. Like, everything that you do to make these processes more accessible isn't a disadvantage to anyone else. Sort of, lots of people would like to know what's going on in meetings that they're booked into. And if you know what to expect in an interview process, like, everyone's going to be better prepared. Sort of one of the things that I'm trying to drive, and almost a byproduct of it, is that I think our process has become more accessible. But the real thing that I'm trying to drive in our interview process is that we're not trying to catch people out. We're trying to find the best presentation of a person that they can put forward, because you can't recreate real world situations. You can't know what they are like in the workplace, how well they work. So you're trying to uncover that. So you don't need to ask tricky questions. You don't need to care about the precise wording that someone gives you back. Sort of, you want to get to that nugget underneath, because even if they're a brilliant coder, they might not be able to talk overly well about their code. And that possibly doesn't matter. It might, but it might not. If they can just crack the code out and it's doing its job and they can talk enough about it, then that's probably the bar that you're trying to get. I think it varies role by role and team by team, but I think you really need to understand what it is that you're trying to actually hire for, and that you give your candidates every opportunity to demonstrate that. And so the biggest thing we've done in hiring, or in our hiring process, is to make that as flexible as possible. So we've largely gone to single stage conversational interviews, and they'll have some tech questions in, they'll have some things going through their CV, they'll have some things about their motivators, but none of them are wedded wordings. We try and keep a consistent set of things we're trying to find out, because then we're comparing people on an even footing. But if we need to change the wording, if we need to approach something in a different way because that's how it's making more sense, or if we switch tech context so that it's in a framework that's familiar to them, Like, none of that matters, because you're trying to get to the nub of what they actually understand and what they can do. Like, yeah, so many interview processes are set up to trip people up and to try and catch people out. And
fail.
like, yeah, you might feel like you've ruled out some blaggers, but like, just have a proper conversation with people. You soon know whether they know what they're talking about. And in 4 years, just taking Kalibrate, in 4.5 years of Kalibrate, I think we've had one duff hire out of probably 40.
Not bad, is it?
And like,
it's not,
touch wood, but as of, if I make it to April, I'll have a year of 0% attrition.
Brilliant.
Like,
brilliant.
It's working.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's not to say it's the only way, but I do think it naturally builds that accessibility because you're flexible to what's best for people.
Yeah. But
I also think we're getting a better outcome out of it as well.
Definitely. There's quite a few points there that you mentioned that resonated with me from listening to this. It was you mentioned flexible on a number of occasions there, and that's what he was saying. He said, have a flexible, adaptable interview process. Don't be rigid, rushed, outdated. You're not there to try and trip people up. It's to try and understand and pull the information that they know. And I think I was talking to my wife about this last night because I put on my post, they said give people interview questions beforehand. Now it's a hot topic, that, isn't it? Some people are like, whoa, no. Others are like, yeah, definitely. And they mentioned on this video, the Autism Plus, was even if it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes beforehand, they're not going to sit there, start Googling the answers. And even if they did, because interviewing's a skill, isn't it? Yeah. Either by interviewing properly, you'd be able to find that out very, very quickly anyway. So it's whether you, irrespective of the person that's being interviewed, everyone would like to have the questions beforehand. It just helps people. Yeah. It helps you showcase, doesn't it? And things like that. And another one was, like you said, detail exactly what the interview process is going to be. You're going to be meeting Dave for 15 minutes, then you'll go and meet Valerie, and this is what you'll be expected to do here, and then you'll meet Adrian, and just so people know. And one thing that popped up, and I never thought of it, is actually tell people exactly how long the interview is going to take, because they might do half an hour, leave thinking, turning themselves upside down, thinking I've had an absolute disaster, where it was only expected to ever be half an hour, So it was really enlightening, and I think I'd recommend anybody watches it. It was amazing, and it opens up a lot of thought, and I think like you said, if you can pull that information from people, then they get a chance to showcase themselves, don't they?
I think that I'll come on to something that might be HR contentious in a second, but in terms of that sort of scene setting and expectation setting, I think just keeping that narrative going throughout. So our process should result in them having been told what the structure is before the interview, but first thing I say in the interview is who I am, what we're going to do.
Yeah.
I tend to give them a 10-minute pretty much waffle about the company, say different things every time. It's just off the top of my head every time, but that both, like, they've been told what's coming up, and then they get to decompress. They get to I make clear they're not going to be tested on anything that I've said, that it's just scene setting for them, but it just allows them to sort of find the tone of what we're doing. And I talk in the same manner pretty much whoever I'm talking to, so they get a slice of me. They get to see sort of who I am, how I work, how I communicate, and they can just settle back for 10 minutes. And then the first thing that we'll do is just ask them about their most recent role or two, depending on how long they've been in the roles. So again, they're sort of easing in with something that they should be in their comfort zone with. But then sort of as we go, not necessarily that you keep updating sort of with in depth of what's going on, but if you're ending the interview, that you make as clear as possible. And this is where the HR bit comes in. Like, sometimes you have to present, if it's a clear no, or even if it's a clear yes, you've got to present those in the right way. Yeah. But to try and not leave that question really hanging at the end, sort of if you expect them to go to the next stage, even if they're in contention rather than you've made a decision, but by then you've probably got are they progressing or not?
Yeah.
And you don't have to necessarily say no, you're not progressing, but you can give a little bit of feedback as to how they've done and what they've presented. One bit of advice that got given to me when interviewing as a candidate, and I've yet to find the perfect wording for it, but is, as one of your final questions, asking if there's anything they're looking for that you've not demonstrated. And
right, okay. Yeah.
I've not quite settled on the way that doesn't sound like, oh, I'm going to say yes to whatever you now say, but it feels like there's something there. But I feel like from the other side, from the interviewing side, you don't want to leave that question open.
Yeah.
You want to make clear, not necessarily, here's our big list, you've not met X, Y, and Z, but there should be a reasonably shared understanding there. It's sort of like your standard rule around one-to-ones is that nothing that comes up in a one-to-one or an appraisal should be a surprise.
Yeah.
And you want the same thing with an interview.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be a surprise whether it's gone well or badly. Like, everyone should be on the same page.
Yeah. And that's a great place to leave it, isn't it? I think. And to flow into that, one thing I was going to mention, they also said, and it sounds like you do face-to-face interviews, but they were also talking about Zoom interviews. And I wouldn't do this anyway, but if you're interviewing a candidate, sometimes it'll be a panel or a couple of people, and the cameras will be off. So you're just interviewing like and talking to a black screen. I mean, how intimidating must that be? So we've not actually done any face-to-face for quite a while. Oh, right.
And part of our drop in the tech test was that we found we couldn't find the best way to make that work remotely. It was working all right. I think still of questionable value when we were face-to-face, but it was adding to the time, and we just didn't find a great way of making it work remotely. But everyone has to have cameras on for interview process. If you've got to switch them off, you can just say, I'm just switching it off for 5 minutes while I do whatever.
Yeah.
But the default is cameras on, because it's, unless obviously there are exceptions, if you've had to dial in on the phone or whatever, sometimes it's better to be able to be connected in than not there. But at least one person the person leading the interview needs to have their camera on.
I think it's key to be able to read facial expressions, isn't it? And to understand how it's going, and put people at ease. Or I think sometimes you see the facial expression, it's good to know whether you need to give more as in an answer as well. So
definitely.
That's great. Do you thinking about hiring, you're thinking about, especially suppose in software engineering teams, you need sort of diversity of thought, you need the people that are going to challenge you need to create innovation and that kind of thing. When you hire, do you hire in line with sort of values, your specific values as a leader, or maybe the business's values, or is it more on competency-based specific skills are you looking for?
So, and this is somewhat variable, sort of, my engineering managers have slightly different approaches to me. We're fairly aligned, but have slightly different approaches. But generally speaking, my two highest priority criteria are attitude and aptitude.
Right.
And so I think attitude, the most important things for me are what they're going to get out of the job. And so quite often, like, the best examples of that, you're going to just get it from how they're talking about what they've done before, and the enthusiasm with which they talk about either the technical solution or what they were delivering. I think sort of broadly, they're the two ways in which you get non-financial reward from from software development, is either you've solved it in an interesting way, whatever it was, or you're really pleased with the end result of what you're doing. I think the best people probably have a balance of both, and particularly can see the value in both. But you can solve really valuable solutions in really boring ways.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily need to have that. I think if you get too alienated from what you're trying to deliver, even if we make software for fuel companies, it's not, we don't think it's world changing, but you still need to be on the page of our end users and the people who are using the software. And if you get too detached from that, I think you introduce problems there as well. But sort of that, finding that motivation, and again, we try and just do that conversationally. And like I say, the best examples it's just going to come across, but you can drill into that a bit more. But then aptitude is, I guess it sort of attitude comes into it a bit as well, but they're not too ring fenced in their abilities. Sort of, there's, I was going to say recently, but it's not. For my whole career, there's been conversations about full stack developers or polyglots and what your expectations are. And I don't put particularly high expectations on, because people get very comfortable. Like, if I'm asked to write anything that isn't in C#, then I won't throw a wobbly, but I'll be out of my comfort zone. But I'll look at anything and try and figure out what it's doing.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't see a piece of code and go, oh, that's a language I've not touched before, I can't possibly look at it. But I'm not about to start writing in Go or whatever. But I'll have a go at understanding, particularly if I've got existing code to look at. And I don't expect people to fully change tech stacks or to go completely out of their comfort zone. But most object-oriented languages and frameworks are akin to each other. You just need to know how the concepts translate. I've done interviews in Java before. And same with JavaScript frameworks. Sort of, there's different paradigms as to how they work, and syntax is different, but they're not that different. And functional languages sort of the same, like the same principles apply. I think being able to take that step back and say, here's my experience and my capabilities that I'm able to demonstrate, and having a bit of awareness of, I think I could turn that in this different angle. Like, I'm not about to be as proficient, even like myself, wouldn't be as proficient in Java as I am with C#. But I can make a good go of it.
It's the attitude, isn't it, I suppose? And
so it's just that sort of, I think that's sort of a really like easily demonstratable example, is that sort of not necessarily language switching, but doing a code review for a language they're not familiar with. But that they're not too walled off to anything. Like because even within same languages, same platforms, you might ask them to shift what product they're working on, or to just do some code reviews for a different product. And like the amount of engineers who'll go, oh, but I don't know anything about that. And I'm not asking you to know as much as them, but I want your insight. I want your perspective on that, because new eyes always help.
Yeah, definitely.
And that they're not sort of walled off from that. So I think it's a really big thing.
What would you say you've given us a little bit of an insight right at the start about the culture, but what's the culture like at Kalibrate?
So I think the most defining thing, and it is somewhat within my function more than within the business. Again, just different functions that work in slightly different ways. But within mine, I'd say the sort of core tenets are transparency, and the most valuable asset to me is my team. And sort of like that is definitely shared by, I've got 2 engineering managers and a test manager, and it's shared by them. And sort of, I think hopefully that instills sort of a bit of familiarity. Sort of, I not so much at Kalibrate, but at various times have tried to tread the line of not being over familiar, sort of, because where I took that step from being a senior dev to taking on a team just got thrust upon me. My manager didn't want to be doing people management. He identified me as someone who could take it on within the team, and I was up for it, so I did. But that meant I was taking on a team that I'd been part of, so I was very close with the team. Quite a few, I'd been doing interview tests, so I'd been part of the process of bringing some of them in, so I was sort of really close in with them, and that somewhat carried on. Obviously, where you're being brought in as a management figure or a leadership figure in a completely new org, it's slightly different, but I've still tried to engender some of that sort of, everyone knows my dog's name, everyone knows what I'm doing, and I try not to at any point sit in a ivory tower from them. Find it really interesting that the perspective of some of them is still, like, they see me as an intimidating figure. I don't think I could be much less, but you do still get a bit, and same with my engineering managers, not that they see that of me, but that their team see a bit of that from them. And I think it's just difficult to get away from, but really that's what we're trying to do. Don't want to go I don't think you need clear structures for making people do their work or anything like that, but equally I think people need to have the confidence that you are the right person in the right position, that they need to understand and appreciate that while you may not be doing as many hours sat at a desk as them, that you are taking the brunt of some of their mistakes. And that you're more accountable for stuff inherently because you're accountable for the breadth of the team. And I think it's a bit of a fine balance, but hopefully we're doing all right at that, and we've got sort of a really good working relationships, really good social relationships, and still they recognise that we're the right people in the right places in the org.
Yeah, definitely. I think from what you said there, I think to create a high performing team, you've got to know them on a personal basis, haven't you? There's got to be that personal connection with them. Like you said, everyone knows your dog's name, and you're bringing down the barriers, you're making yourself more accessible. It's not them and us, it's, you're getting to know them on a personal level.
Well, and I think like people can have whatever levels of privacy they want, and like you don't want to overstep that mark in terms of their world and what they've got going on, but equally you want enough understanding so that at the simplest example, on Wednesdays they pick the kids up from school, so you're not going to worry if they're not in a meeting at 4:00 on a Wednesday. Or like where people have more complex situations, the more you can know the better, because like same as the interview process, you want to work to the best of what you've got and the best of what people are able to deliver. The benefit of tech is or software development is so outcome based inherently, because you're producing something and you're not producing something that is better or quicker if you're sat at a machine in a factory for a longer period of time. Like that's not the nature of it. But you are producing output, and so however you can best work with people and the best way you can flex to them, and whether that's flexible hours, whether it's flexibility over where they're working, as much as possible flexibility in ways that they're working, but you want the best outcome on an individual and on your team levels. And so like the more open a horrible word, but narrative you've got of what people have got going on, what people's situations are. And the more you can understand that, like take the earliest days of COVID, sort of everyone plunged into remote working, or at least from orgs like ours where ostensibly people could do a day from home before, but even most people weren't doing that. So it was a huge shift, and you don't know what setups people have got at home. Have people now got are people now trying to work with 4 kids running around because they've been pulled out of school as well? Sort of just enough colour to be able to inform those conversations. And obviously some of them you'll know inside and out. I know it's my engineering manager's little boy's birthday the other day. Like I know that, but you don't need that depth on everyone, but you need enough so that your process and their process isn't disadvantaged by anything that you've not communicated about there.
Well, you've got to, the information that you're pulling together there and accessing in order for your team to work at the best of their capabilities to get the outcomes that they're needed. You've got to care, haven't you? If you didn't care, you'd never look for that information. You never want that information. So it creates a really good team environment, doesn't it? They know you care. You're trying to help them support doing the best possible work they can do. Do you think it's because you're doing software engineering where it goes to everything's based on an output? Is it easier to have people more accountable? Is it easy to hold people accountable to what they need to do?
This is a interesting topic right now within my team. We're trying to work with this because objectively, it is, but you really want accountability to be on the team, and you want the team to sort of be accountable for the output of a sprint. And so what we're trying to bridge, it's just varying levels of success and varying levels of expectations within the teams at the moment, is that shift from individual accountability, which I think is fairly transparent, sort of if you want to know what work someone's done, you can always find out. And it's sort of one of the big arguments that pre-COVID I had for why remote work was never a problem in the software world is you want to see what someone's done, go and look on GitHub at what commits they've made. Sort of it is an objective output, even if they've not done much code. You can ask, I was researching this, or I was figuring out why. There's always an actual output to what people are doing. But so at an individual level, I think you can do it fairly easily. Might need a bit of communication if it doesn't look like as what you'd expect, but at a team, shifting that to team accountability and team expectation, I think what I said earlier about the attitude about that you're considering the product as your output rather than the problem you're solving, I think that's where that difference starts to come in, because at an individual level, you are probably solving a technical problem. You're solving, it may not be complex, but you're solving something with code. But more as a team, because at a minimum, you've got your engineer and you've got your QA, and they've probably had input from the product owner. So at minimum, you've got 3 people there who've pulled together to deliver something in the end product. And that's functionality. That's something someone's doing with the product. And so I think leaning more towards that side and getting the team more bought into this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is the benefit to the customer. I think that's one of the elements that will start bringing out that, I guess it's team collaboration to an extent, but it's that you've shifted that accountability so that if someone's off sick and you don't know if they're back before the end of the sprint, that rather than that work just not getting done, someone's picking it up. And obviously there's admin things that make life easier with that they're committing work at the end of every day and they're not leaving stuff on their local machines. Like, you can make life easier with those bits, but that the team recognise as a team we committed to that thing getting done, so it's going to get done, rather than, oh well, Jeff said he was going to do that, so if Jeff's not here, that's not getting done.
Yeah.
Like, it's that difference, really.
Yeah.
I think we're exploring a lot of other bits around it. So I think one of the biggest issues causing that is fear of failure.
Yeah.
And that they don't want to take on someone else's stuff, because then what if they get the blame if it's not right?
Yeah.
And sort of big challenge that we're finding is that you can talk about no blame culture and fail fast.
Yeah, fail fast.
Till you're blue in the face.
Yeah.
But we're now trying to embody that, and we're trying to make sure that that's not just something we're saying, that the team are actually seeing it in practice. And so we've done a couple of exercises now of failures of the sprint. I've done it with my management team. So they,
how's that gone?
to our team meeting, I tasked them all with bringing a failure from the previous sprint, and they were all varying levels. One of them was that they'd not read their notes properly because they'd not realised they needed to bring one. So perfectly valid, like recognised what they could do better next time. But we're going to we don't want to focus on it too much. So we're not going to do it every sprint, but we're going to do it with some frequency and just get the team sort of making sure that they know that everyone in the team through the last sprint has failed at something. And nothing's caught fire because of it. No one's got in trouble because of it. But emphasising the standard software principle is move left. So you want to find your defects as quickly as possible, because the sooner you find them, the cheaper they are to fix.
Yeah.
If a dev can find it before it's even gone to testing, that's the cheapest pace, because no one else has been involved. As far as everyone else is concerned, that never existed.
Yeah.
Not in terms of keeping it quiet, but you want the same with any failures. You just want to flag them as soon as possible. Yeah. You want to collectively work towards, how do we fix this? How do we stop it happening again? That's all that matters. And so you care about what went wrong. You care about who was involved, but it's not so that you can say, well, you did this, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
It's so you can say, like, you did this, what actually happened? Like, I need to know, so that we can then say, all right, well, it was a mistake. Mistakes happen, absolutely fine. Or something was misunderstood back here, so we need to fix this so that we can then prevent that happening in the future. All about, again, back transparency. Like, good communication, open communication really underpins all of these bits, and we aren't quite where we'd like to be. Got a very good, very high performing team, but they've got that much more headroom because we're not where we want to be on these bits. And maybe we stay at the same performance and they're all just much happier. And I'm fine with that as well.
Yeah. But I suppose you're removing that fear, the individual fear on. That's what you're trying to do with I take it, did you go first when you said of course I did.
I brought mine forward first. And I made clear that I'd got plenty I could choose from as well.
That's it, isn't it? It's breaking down a barrier as well, isn't it? But if you can remove that fear, you start to, like you said, you start to progress faster, don't you? And it's better for the business. I know we're going to have to wrap up soon. Very last question. What makes a good leader, and what do you think makes a good leader, and what's your leadership style?
So I think mine is best, but not just because it's mine. It's sort of what I've responded the best to in the past, and that's just empathetic leadership, and touches on a lot of the things that we've covered, but transparency of communication. Knowing as much as you're able to know. Like, some things in a commercial world, you aren't able to communicate everything downwards, but you can usually communicate that something's happening. Or you, same as the one-to-one thing, you want to make sure nothing's ever a surprise, because it needn't be. If it's a surprise, you've not been having enough conversations and you've not been communicating enough. And so sort of having scheduled time in for that communication. So I have weekly one-to-ones with all of my team. They're unstructured, if they need to be.
Yeah.
I've got a structure we can fall back on, and I'll take to that. And probably when it comes to annual appraisals, we'll lean more towards that structure. But even those weekly one-to-ones, I expect to have discussed most of the stuff. Some of it have been, I will catch up on this in your one-to-one because we've got time to go through it then.
Yeah.
But it's unlikely that that's the first time I'm hearing about anything even then. And the same for them, sort of anything that's going to affect them, I'll try and give them the heads up before I'm communicating to them properly. And I think that's sort of really the thing that underpins my style and my approach is that openness. And like, I view my role as optimizing my team. Sort of, I've gone from solving problems with code to solving problems with solutions to solving business problems with a function or a team and then function. And so really they're the machine I'm optimizing now. Like, indirectly, some of that may be the architecture, some of that may be the code, but I just want them working as best as possible. So my focus is almost entirely the people, and it's working for me so far.
That's it. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And you can just keep tweaking it as you go along. I mean, I like that analogy at the end where you were saying communicate. Even there'll be some things that you can't pass down, but even you're just saying, I haven't got anything to tell you at the moment, because otherwise people start making it up in their own mind, don't they? And it can just spiral out of control. So that's brilliant. Dave, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming to speak to me, and good luck with the operation.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Speak to you again soon.
Cheers, man.
Ta, man.